Okay, sorry I can't be with you this afternoon. I've managed to do something fairly hideous to my back, and I'm now currently reclining on the sofa with a hot water bottle. But I thought I'd use the benefits of modern technology to record a lesson for you, and I hope it's useful. Okay, what we did the back end of last lesson, if you remember, we looked at this idea of utilitarianism, and I talked to you briefly about these are ideas of utilitarianism, and Jeremy Bentham, the quote, "It is the greatest happiness of the greatest number that is the measure of right and wrong." And of course, out of this, we can start looking at many issues. One of those issues that we would unpick is what is happiness, because it's very difficult to quantify happiness. Happiness for one person might be a different sort of happiness for somebody else. And also the idea of right and wrong as well, how you quantify right and wrong. These are issues which Margaret Atwood in The Handmaid's Tale picks up on and develops. She explores ideas of what is the greatest good for a society and takes the idea of childbirth, procreation as being at the centrepiece of a good society in a world where men and women naturally don't seem to be able to have children. And if society is to continue on, what needs to happen? So if the measure of the greatest good is the continuation of society through childbirth, what do we need to put in place to make that happen? What I'd like us to do then is to look at chapter 1. And I'm going to give you some questions to focus on for reading chapter 1. It's only a couple of pages long, but hopefully these will focus your reading. So, as you read these first couple of pages, I'd like you to focus on the following. I'd like you to look at images of the past, images of the future, the symbolic nature of the aunt and what they seem to represent. Think particularly about what a traditional aunt might represent and how maybe these aunts somehow subvert that. Think about naming in general, how things are named and why things are named in the way they are. The coping strategies of the women in the gym, and then what themes and ideas the opening chapter introduces. So what I'd like you to do is I'd like you just to pause this recording and spend about 10-15 minutes closely reading that first chapter with a pencil in your hand, annotating the text, and then from there we will look at it in more detail. So if you just pause the recording now. Okay, so let's look at this opening paragraph. I'll just read it through. We slept in what had once been the gymnasium. The floor was of varnished wood, with stripes and circles painted on it, for the games that were formerly played there. The hoops for the basketball nets were still in place, though the nets were gone. A balcony ran round the room, for the spectators, and I thought I could smell, faintly like an after-image, the pungent scent of sweat, shot through with the sweet taint of chewing gum and perfume from the watching girls, felt skirted as I knew from pictures, later in miniskirts, then pants, then in one earring, spiky green-streaked hair. Dancers would have been held there. The music lingered, a palimpsest of unheard sound, style upon style, an undercurrent of drums, a forlorn wail, garlands made of tissue paper flowers, cardboard devils, a revolving ball of mirrors, powdering the dancers with a snow of light. What you'll immediately notice here is the contrast between the very sort of straightforward opening sentence here. We slept in what had once been the gymnasium. There's something very kind of matter of fact about this. And then these long sentences as the chapter progresses. You'll notice here just how many commas there are all the way through. Long sentences building up lots and lots of detail as the paragraph progresses. And you get a sense here of the narrator Offred having this after image, this imagining what it was like to be in the gymnasium when it was being used as a school gymnasium. So let's just look through line sentence by sentence. So straight away we get a sense of time that has passed. We get a sense that what used to be now no longer is. So this places us at some stage, in some respects, in a world where things have changed, where things that used to be used for a certain function no longer are. The fact that they're sleeping in a gymnasium as well is interesting, because that immediately suggests that the spaces are being used for what they for what they're not supposed to be used for. So we see a world here where things have changed. A lot of past tense as well. So it's this use of past tense which suggests time past. That Offred, the narrator, is in a place which used to be a place of games, of fun, of exercise, but now we've got that real contrast there between something very static and something very active. So even in those first two sentences, we get contrasts built up between past and present, between passive and active, between the reality of now and memory. Then we move on into these long sentences, as I said, with lots and lots of commas. The hoops for the basketball nets were still in place, the nets were gone, and then it goes on here. I thought I could smell faintly like an after image. That's interesting, isn't it, the way she's using smell and image. It's as if the smell has created a memory or evoked a memory. So this and we do often say, don't we, that smells can evoke a memory. That smells can create give us a link to the past. Apparently, it's something to do with the fact that our sense organs, our sense of smell, is linked to a certain part of our brain which bypasses other parts. So our sense of smell directly links into the part of our brain that stores memories. Which is why if you have a smell, it can often conjure up an image immediately without you even having to think about it. It just occurs. So it's almost as if here this faint smell of sweat and the sweet taint of chewing gum and perfume creates this image of the past for Offred. And then she goes down and these very evocative memories that come through. The mini skirts, the pants, the one earrings, green streaked hair. We've got this sense of time passing as well here, haven't we? The time is moving on, from mini skirts, later, then pants. So it's as if here there's the whole progress of I suppose in some aspects, female feminism and female emancipation, to go from mini skirts, then pants, which is quite masculine, one earring, spiky green streaked hair, which I assume is the punk movement. So there's this movement through time here that Offred seems to get just from that one smell of the perfume and the chewing gum. And then there's this again contrast with the sleeping, the dancers, the music, palimpsest, sort of an amalgamation of building on one sound on another, style upon style, an undercurrent of drums, a forlorn wail, all of these wonderful rich images that we get from this opening, which again is suggestive of time passing. And she uses all the senses here. She's got the smell up here, the sight, she's got the sound here, the mirrors, all of these senses which are kind of building one on top of the other. So it's a very sensual opening. And then you get this wonderfully poetic image powdering the dancers with the snow of light. There's something very beautiful, but there's something terribly sad in this opening. That Offred, who we know nothing about in this first paragraph, Offred, who's sleeping in this space that used to be a space of games, of dances, of discovery, of growth, of sex in many ways, all of these images which are building up one after the other, and yet here she is with other people, because of course the first word in the book is we, which immediately suggests a sense of community, a sense of a group. We don't know who this group is. We don't at the moment. This group of people who are sleeping in a place where all this used to happen. So there's a sense of sadness in this opening chapter, in this opening paragraph. We then move on. Again, there's that link there that I've just mentioned about sex. Old sex in the room, and loneliness and expectation of something without a shape or name. This is a dominant theme of the novel. The dominant theme of the novel is language, its uses, its misuses, how it's appropriated, how it's removed from people, how the language itself is restricted. And right from the beginning, Offred's finding it difficult to name this thing, this something, she calls it. She gets very frustrated with the inability to name these things in her life. There are certain chapters in the novel where she's exploring her past, and she can't put a name on some of the things that have happened. So the idea of naming, the language itself is somehow limited. It's somehow not enabling her to fully access her past, to fully access her experiences. And then memory. Memory we see as another key theme of the novel. The memory is something which in some respects keeps her sane, that the memories of the past, the memories of her past life with her partner and her daughter, how these memories somehow are the things that enable her to survive in a pretty horrific world. And again here, the hands that were on us there and then in the small of the back or out back in the parking lot, the television room with the sound turned down and only the pictures flickering over lifting flesh. There's that real image of kind of physicality, of physical intimacy, and how important it is. And again, another key theme, we get lots of key themes in this one paragraph, is touch. So the importance of touch. The touch is something that draws people to one another, that holds people to one another, that's one of those foundations of relationship, and not just sexual relationship between husband and wife, daughter and mother, parents, friends, and that touch has been outlawed here. That you'll notice as you read the novel how the act of touch is something which is seen as being wrong somehow. Even the act between the handmaid and the commander is somehow devoid of touch. So this paragraph here very much talking about the importance and the memory of touch and how important it was to her. This idea of yearning as well. The yearning and longing for difference, something different. And this is yearned, not present. This is the women of the past. This is not the handmaid now. This is the handmaid then. Yearning for the future, longing for things to change, to be grown up. So she's talking here about young people, teenagers, children who long for adulthood, long to be responsible and grown up and have access to everything that the adult world offers. Of course, there's a deep irony here, because actually the world that Offred is now a part of is a pretty awful world. So now, in many respects, Offred is longing and yearning for the past. This is an interesting sentence here. How did we learn it, that talent for insatiability? It seems like almost something sort of fairly negative. She's talking here about this kind of the desire for sex. How did we learn it? Who did we learn it from? That's a question that is asked at the beginning of the book. Key question about how people learn to be a certain way? How do they learn to be sexual beings? How do they learn to be attractive and attracted to? And again, this idea of the air here, that she can smell it. It was still in the air. She can smell this sort of desire, this need. The afterthought, and we tried to sleep in the army cots that had been set up in rows, spaces between so we could not talk. So there's this contrast here. We go back to this idea of physical intimacy and touch, and we go forward. There's the sense of separation here. That these women in these army cots, and again there's that sense of regimentation. So these army cots are spaced so that they can't. There's no touch and there's no talk. So straight away from the beginning of the novel, we see this real what we call a binary opposition, and I'll talk a lot about binary oppositions because the novel is full of them. We've had past and future, complete opposites. We have touch versus separation, or closeness versus separation. So we've got these past and future, closeness and separation. The joy and closeness and love versus a sort of utilitarian sense that these women are there for a purpose. And this is interesting again. They had children's blankets, so again it's almost as if they're treating them like children and folding the clothes neatly. There's a feeling here almost of obedience. It's an interesting opening because we just don't know anything about these women that are sleeping here. All we can tell is they seem to be in a world which is in a place which is terribly restrictive and regimented and almost being treated like children. And then we get this quite severe image here. The lights were turned down but not out. Aunt Sarah and Aunt Elizabeth. Now when we first read this bit, the image of the aunt as being kind of a friendly figure. The aunt is somehow Aunt Sarah and Aunt Elizabeth. It's not the surnames, it's Aunt Sarah and Aunt Elizabeth. But then they have electric cattle prods. And that's quite harsh and quite severe and quite brutal. So there's another binary opposition there between the kind of the ideal of the aunt versus the reality of the cattle prods slung from thongs on their leather belts. So this world, this dystopian world that we're introduced to, and we'll talk quite a bit about dystopia being the opposite of utopia, the utopia where everything that could possibly be good is, and the dystopia being where pretty much everything that could possibly be awful is. So we're introduced to quite a dystopian world here, the world of Gilead, and we have these contrasts set up from the very beginning. But they're not trusted. These are the aunts, couldn't be trusted with guns. Guns were for the guards, specially picked from the angels. Again, there's that kind of the contrast between the naming and the reality. That we expect an angel to be somehow a guardian, somehow watching over us and protecting us, and yet it seems here the angels have guns and are at the top of the chain of oppression. And then we move down the guards. Obviously, we realise these are men. They're not allowed in the building, and the women aren't allowed out. And the angels stood outside with their backs to us. And again, there's that sense of separation. What we'll notice is that sight of seeing is dangerous. That these women are somehow seen as because of their very nature of being women, they're somehow seen as being dangerous. And there are links here to fundamental Islam, in the idea of the woman who's covered in the burqa, and somehow her physical sight is somehow seen as being of danger to the purity of men and their inability to get close to God if they're somehow tempted. And again, there's that idea of speech So it's not just seeing, but it's also speech is dangerous. So the seeing and speech are both somehow prescribed, they're somehow limited, because both of them are seen as being dangerous, that the word itself is dangerous. And again, something could be exchanged. We thought some deal, some trade-off. We still had our bodies. So there we have that link back to the physical power that women maybe have over men. That women's bodies themselves are seen as being dangerous. That the body itself is seen as being of danger to men. So the men have their backs so that they're not tempted. In this final paragraph, we learn to whisper without sound. In the semi-darkness, we could stretch out our arms when the aunts weren't looking and touch each other's hands across space. We learn to lip read, our heads flat on beds, turned sideways watching each other's mouths. In this way we exchanged names from bed to bed. And that wonderful kind of chant at the end of the chapter. So, another key theme here is how the women cope. What is it that... It's actually not just the women, it's how all members of the society cope. Because every single one of the members of society, whether it be the handmaids, the commanders, the wives, the angels, all of them have ways of coping with this deeply oppressive society. And for the women, they lip read, and so they still have a language. That even though they're not able to speak, they learn a new language, in the way that if you're deaf, you learn sign language. So there's this human need for communication that can't be totally eradicated. That the women find a way to communicate, and finally these names, and that we'll see that naming is just so important in the novel, and that by naming, to name is to know. So as soon as you learn a name, you begin to know something, which is why I think as a teacher it's very, very important to learn students' names from the first lesson, because as soon as you learn names, you form connection and you form an understanding. And that's exactly what's happening here, that Offred and the other women learn each other's names, but because by learning each other's names, they somehow get to know one another. So I think that'll do for now. As you can see, it's a terribly rich opening couple of pages, but it does set up those dominant themes of the novel, naming and knowledge, coping mechanisms, the binary oppositions between past and future, sight and speech as being dangerous and therefore controlled, this kind of deep-rooted desire people have for communication, whether and unity, whether that be through sex or simply through talking, and that idea of longing for the past that we'll see as the novel progresses.